Hello, everybody. Welcome to Listán Negro versus País webinar. I'm Celia Méndez from Viñátigo and Nicholas Pierce Wines, and I am recording this on another day than our event because I myself forgot to hit record when we started. So Josh from Archive started by presenting this webinar and introducing our guests today. First of all, thank you very much for getting these wonderful wines and watching this presentation with me. Later, I will put the other video that we recorded today of the event, and you will be able to listen to Josh from Archive, Jorge Méndez Diaz from Bodegas Viñátigo, myself, and last but not least, Derek Mossman, who is the brain behind Garage Wine Co. Company. So thank you very much again for being here. Jorge Méndez, first of all, is an agricultural engineer and winemaker. He's the fifth generation of a family of wine growers and currently works at his family estate Viñátigo, located in the island of Tenerife. During the past year, he has traveled and worked across South America and Europe, doing harvests in Chile, Argentina, Burgundy, and all over Spain. I am Celia Méndez. After studying in Bordeaux and working with a small producer in Burgundy, I moved to Toronto, where I currently work with Nicholas Pierce Wines. We also have Derek Mossman, who is a co-owner of Garage Wine Co. Company in the Upper Maipo region of Chile, along with his wife, Pilar Miranda. He's a Canadian expat and ex-ski coach who discovered Chile by chance. With a passion for Chile's wine potential, Mossman dedicated himself to bringing wine to the table with narratives behind them, made on a human scale. So we're going to start this presentation by looking at this map. We're looking into geography and history. If you can, I would encourage you to pour a glass of wine, of each of the wines, so they can open and you don't get parched while I talk. This first little movie is from a website called earthnewschool.net. You can see the link at the bottom right. It shows the surface wind conditions in the Atlantic a couple of days ago. Now, the main feature in the middle is actually a temporary low pressure system that has parked in the middle of the Atlantic. Usually over the Azores, there is a semi-permanent high pressure system that would actually spin the winds the opposite way. But if you look over to the coast of Africa and the Canary Islands, you can see the winds that would have brought you from the southern Iberian Peninsula first to the Canary Islands, and then from there, using the equatorial trade winds to the Caribbean and or South America, all the way through here. So here we have the surface currents that form due to the interplane of surface winds and the mixing of warmer and cooler waters. These currents also favor sea travel from Europe through the Canarias and then onto the Americas, while the return journey would favor the northern route using the Gulf Stream instead of fighting against the trade winds. We're going into this slide that shows the trade that these Spanish from the Kingdom of Castile and people from all over Europe would take to go to the New World from 1750 to the 1800s. So this is a map made from digitized ship logs from the age of sail, showing that most, if not close, all of the Spanish trade routes bound for the Americas went through the Canary Islands. And this is because the Canary Islands were really the last stop before really sailing towards the America, a very, very strategic point into the Atlantic. They have always been key in all the trade relationships with the rest of the world, whether you wanted to go around Africa or to the New World. So this means that many settlers, many conquerors from Europe settled down on the island, and they brought with him their vines, their grapevines, because wine was a beverage that sometimes was healthier than drinking water, just by the fact that it was a fermented beverage. And another very important point is that everybody who was coming from Europe were Catholic, and they needed the wine in their rituals, because if something like a staple for them, sorry, when they were, sailing to the new world or to new lands, was bringing with them people from the church. So of course they needed the wine for those rituals. So we have people who came from Portugal who brought grapevines, but they did not also brought the grapevines. They also brought their training methods that we will see later. People also from all over Spain, people from Catalonia, people from Andalusia, and also people from France and from Italy. They all settled down in the islands, and we can see nowadays this influence and this heritage in the words we use, in the surnames we have, and of course in viticulture. So the archipelago became the very first viticultural melting point, because the Portuguese would bring a grapevine that would be trained in the Spanish style and vice versa. That's the example of, for example, the Listan Blanco, that it's a synonym for Palomino. It's the most used grape for sherry. But in the northwest of Tenerife, which is this big island here, you can see that the northwest is all covered by clouds. These are in fact the trade winds we were talking about before, that when they are stopped by Mount Teide, that it's in the very middle of Tenerife, it reaches 4,000 meters high. They condense and they form this sea of cloud. So here we have a very humid, cold weather. And they brought the Palomino vines, but they actually trained them the Portuguese style. That it's this illustration that we have down here. This is from a book that was published in 1806 by Sabine Berthelot, called Histoire naturelle des îles Canaries. So here we have the example of how they were training the vines in pergolas that we call parrales locally. So a very important viticultural melting pot. We're going on to our next slide, where we're going to talk about the Listán Negro. Listán Negro is one of the most important varieties in the history of winemaking and viticulture in the Canary Islands. It represents approximately 80% of the red varieties cultivated on the islands. It only exists in the Canary Islands, and guess what? It is frequently wrongly mixed up with Listán Prieto, which is the other grape that we will taste today. So Listán Negro was originally, was spontaneously originated by the natural crossing of Listán Blanco and Negramol. So they made Listán Negro. There is another grape in the Canary Islands called Listán Prieto, that it's a synonym for Pais, that it's the grape that we will taste later and that Derek will talk about. So this grape is a wonderful example of the influence of the different European settlers on the islands. It is a natural crossing between the grape Negramol that arrived from the island of Madeira in the 18th century and the Listán Blanco that was brought by the Andalusians in the 18th century too. Jorge will explain now that these grapes were brought to sort of like make less impactful, less severe, the impact of the vine diseases of mildew and oidium on the island. And he will also talk about phylloxera. And from now on, I will paste the other part of the video that we did the other day, and you will be able to listen to the full conversation. Thank you.
Two diseases that came from America with phylloxera and was affecting the vine. So phylloxera never affect the vines in the Canary Island, but mildew and oidium did. So introducing Listán Blanco, which was a very resilient variety, was the best strategy to maintain the high productivity of the Canary Island wine industry. So these two grapes got crossed naturally and originated Listán Negro. So Listán Negro is a cross between Listán Blanco and Negramol. Negramol, you can find some examples. I don't know if it's true or not, really, but you can find some examples in data that have the name of San Francisco. No, Derek?
In the south of Chile, in Itata. Yeah.
So
yes, where the Negro Mole exists here. We say San Francisco.
yeah, okay.
There is a small percentage of it, but we're going to make a wine from it this year. Yes.
Perfect. So normally training method used for this variety depends on the area where it is cultivated. No, in the northwest of Tenerife, it is usually trained in high parrales for making roses. The pergola style system inherited from the Portuguese, and in lower parrales, known as rastreros, for making red wines. In Valle de la Orotava, for example, is trained with a cordon trenzado, and in Baixis in the south of Tenerife. In this style, it's totally depending from the lifestyle of the people that come from Europe, no? So, for example, in the northwest part of Tenerife, Portuguese and Galician people come with the pergola system. In the south part of Tenerife, people from Castilla brought the Baso system or the Bash vine system. And then in La Orotava, people from Castilla that brought Malvasia that need very longer prunes need to make this cordon trenzado.
Yeah, so yesterday at night, Josh and I were texting and talking about which grape came from where, and we were saying who is the relative of who, because it's very exciting. Now you hear about hybrid varieties, but this happened all naturally in the Canary Islands. So a grape that was brought from Madeira by the Portuguese settlers got together with the Listan Blanco, that it's a synonym for Palomino Fino in Jerez. And suddenly in the wild nature, these grapes get together and combine and originate something completely new, right? So this is what we are tasting tonight. And we will compare it with Pais because it's wrongly mistaken to be Listán Prieto. And this is, so our father, Jorge and I, he has been identified the indigenous grape varieties of the Canary Islands. And 20 years ago, when he started, he was taking sequences of the DNA of the grapes and sort of comparing to see, to try to identify the origin of all that viticultural heritage that we had in the Canary Islands. And at the beginning, he was only working with 6 segments, like sequences of DNA. So he thought that Listán Negro was the same one as País, as Listán Prieto. But lately, in his last research, he took 20 different sequences of the DNA. And that's how he found out that it was not the same. And I think that, and then he saw that the DNA chain was exactly the same as some part of the Negramol and some part of the Listán Blanco. So this is what proves the sort of like parenthood of these grapes. So it's pretty exciting.
I think it's interesting to say that, just so people put it into perspective, Cabernet Sauvignon, which would be a very popular wine for many people, is also a cross. If you've been on your wine tours, you know it's Cabernet Franc with Sauvignon Blanc. And just to put it into a little better perspective, that cross doesn't happen until 1763. And the ships and the trade winds we're all talking about here from the Canaries is the 1500s. They're coming to South America. It just kind of put the spin on your head when you think this sort of thing is going on 200 years before Cabernet.
Yeah. So these are images of the cordon trenzado that we were talking before. This is the training method used in Valle de la Orotava. So you can see they can be very, very long, and it's normally pretty high yielding. And it's pretty amazing.
It's normally between 6 and you can see vines of 20-21 meters longer. So it depends. And this system in this time is more to approach the risk, no, to approach the slopes than another one thing, I think.
Shall we move into País?
Into País. So, I mean, we see the little map here will show you how Pais got to, using those trade winds, got to North America, first to Santo Domingo, and then on to Central America, and where it spread both north and south, north up where it became mission grape, in the mission grape in California, and then down south where, among other names, it's País in Chile, as well as Criolla in Argentina, Negra Peruana in Peru, and it's represented quite a majority of the vineyards. Maybe we can get Derek to talk a little bit about it.
Super. I think the first thing we have to realize is that this comes as raisins, and raisins were probably kind of literally preventing scurvy, people reading them, sailors reading them, but it is planted as raisins. And we were talking a little bit about the history. The oldest record of País in Chile I found is from 1548. And it's a tax document of the alcohol taxes being paid of a small winery in Portezuelo, which is really just kind of on the other side of the border from Mali to Itata. And I think it's one thing to say the date 1548, but it's another thing to think about it a little bit and think that Michelangelo is alive, the Renaissance is going on, and he's just painted the Sistine Chapel. Like literally, if you look at our wine here, to connect with the last comment I made, we call this wine the 215 BC ferment, because this is 215 years before the first document of Cabernet Sauvignon exists. So this is 215 before Cabernet. And I think it's just interesting to put that into perspective. Of course, all of this is only possible because in Chile, we have never had phylloxera. And it means that we don't have, we have pie franco, we say, we have roots that go really down. So that go, how do you say, it's one root. It's not a root of one with a plant grafted onto the other. So in the end, what you have vineyards that are, it's not that every plant is 250 years old, because they're all varying ages. As they get tired, different, how do you say, the root structure comes up with a new sprout, or you make mugrons, we say, where you create like an umbilical cord. But there are many vineyards that are hundreds of years old. And I think it's just fascinating to think that, how did these vineyards and these scraggly hillsides without any, how do you say, water, without any irrigation survive for what would be about 20 generations. And part of the reason, beyond probably enjoying the tipple, is that when homesteading went on in the south of Chile, homesteading involved, like it did in Canada, farming the land and building a home, but also making wine to help the Catholic Church continue its venture south to save souls. I think that puts it into perspective a little better. Pais has always been used in Chilean wines. When the boom, or to say the Belle Epoque came and brought the French fries to Chile, of course that became vogue. So when Chile went out to the world to conquer the supermarkets in the late 80s or 90s, they led with those wines. But these wines have been part of Chilean culture, Chilean, how do you say, country, small town wines since forever. If Pais was 30 years ago the most planted variety in Chile, it's now number 2, only to Cabernet Sauvignon. And it's just kind of a really, how do you say, a real moment of flux now as natural winemakers, as people get on to what this really is, and it starts to expand, how much continues to be pulled up and how much begins to conquer the hearts of consumers around the world, like all of you.
I see many similarities in what you are saying about País and Chile with the Canary Islands, because phylloxera has never affected the vines in the Canary Islands neither. And yesterday I was talking with Jorge over the phone, and we were talking about some vines that are planted in front of the winery, and I was like, wow, Jorge, do you remember when we were like little and we would sit on the vine because it has like the shape of a chair? And I was like, I can't believe it, like 10 years have passed by, or 15 years. And then he was saying that he had the same conversation with my dad. And my dad would say that when he was a little kid, those vines were already old. So it's like history repeats itself like generation after generation. And it's true that in the early 90s, the government of the Canary Islands was sort of like giving grants to wineries to introduce international varieties, because it was the trend, right? Like, let's make Syrah, let's make Cabernet Sauvignon. And then my dad, who comes from a very small town and knew of the great heritage of all the minority varieties, was like, no, you're crazy. You cannot work with international varieties because we have the hugest treasure here. So let's use the treasure that we have here. And it's true that like Listán Negro sometimes is seen like a rustic variety, and people don't really see value on the grape, because it's the grape that you would use to make everyday wine. And they would say, oh no, but that's something that you drink every day. It has nothing special, but it has an incredible historic heritage. And I think
but also from a flavor point of view, if we
yeah,
think of the meals we've had in restaurants over the last decade, it's no longer that you just eat the fillet or you just eat the T-bone. Good chefs today have learned to use the whole animal. And some of the best meals I've had, I think Minnie would be in agreement with me, are from the cheaper cuts or the lesser used cuts. And in the end, I think the reason Minnie complained about Pais having rustic tannins was because they were making it as if it were Cabernet.
exactly.
But it's its own animal, you know. In the end, if you make it as you should make Pais, you can make a wonderful wine with its own unique flavors. What you can't do is put the cookie cutter on and expect its tannins to perform like Cabernet. I don't want to talk too long, but it's interesting what you say about the age, because the old fellows here, they say the same thing that people work with. You ask them how old a vineyard is, and they look at you. What are you, a moron? Does it look young to you? You know, and when you try to narrow them down, but how old would it be? Would it be 80 years old? They'll smile and they say, when I was young, it looked just like this. So if I'm now old, it must be really old. And you never get any more precision than that from them, because to them, the idea of years and all of that, it's not a part of the way they live.
Yeah, something that we were commenting yesterday, and Jorge can talk more about this, is that he thinks that Listán Negro is one of the grapes that have like the most potential when it comes to winemaking, the elegance and the character that it can get, right? That it's not like it should be marginalized because it's very it's like very extended in the Canaries. So we are on the same point. We have more pictures of País here, and we can see how big the roots are.
I think Listán Negro is not only interesting on the palate and on the delicate tannins the grape have. I think it's more on the way, just for example, we are thinking about, we are in the Canary Island, we are always identifying and always working in searching and understanding more about our grapes. So for example, Listán Negro, we have yields about 4 or 5 tons per hectare. It's not a lot. And then we have another red grapes, more in the mouth of the people, like Baboso Negro or Negramol or another ones, that you have yields of 1 or 2 tons per hectare. So normally in productivity for vignerons or for people that work in the vines, it's more easy to work with Listán Negro that have a little bit more productivity, not a lot, because I think 4 or 5 tons per hectare is not a lot. But I think it's more easy for these people, no? So it depends.
Our with yields here is that as País has kind of had to fight for its place, the yields go up because people, they don't know what they'll be paid. And not to criticize Chile, but I mean, we all know Chile is this kind of, you know, this experiment that came out of Reaganomics or Thatcherism or something. So in the end, the economy, the invisible hand of the market is supposed to rule everything, so that you get the smaller players, they don't know what they're going to be paid. So the way to curb their bet would be, is that what you say, that is to produce a lot of kilos. Yeah. So you have farms like that, and then you have farms that you start to take more seriously, where you work with people every year and they know what they're being paid. They know that the work they're doing with horses and everything is worth it. And then you see yields come to be more natural. I'd agree with like the 4 or 5, but there's also farms that, and in the end, the grape doesn't talk. The grapes are not the same. You know, you get rusticity if you take it to the limit.
Exactly.
I actually had a question about the Pais. So the direct translation of Pais is country. Do you think that, Derek, do you think that comes from it being like Chile, the country's grape? Or is it like the country grape that those laborers out in the country use and drink?
I honestly don't. I've never really gotten into that. In the end, things like this, you wouldn't have had a name for it. Like Negro Mold, they say the big one, El Grande, and they don't need to be any more precise than that. There's only two. There's the little one and the big one. I'm not sure when Pais really starts to be called that. You know, they say Pepeño would be a simple wine from the country,
Okay.
from the countryside. But in the end, the naming of things was never a thing of theirs. You know, I guess I grew up with you named cars. It was like a funny thing to do. So in the end, I'm always interested in knowing what the horse's name is, because I like to put people's names in pictures, and I love to have the horse's name. And in the end, like there's some horses that they don't have names. To them, it's like, why would you give a horse a name? And you start thinking, well, come on, think about that. So they named one machine for me. They called it Máquina. So our tractor is called the other machine, La Otra Máquina. Yeah. We have one small tractor we use on one farm. Yeah.
When it comes to naming and wording, we have a name in the Canary Islands that it's Vino del País. And the Canary Islands are not a country, but when you say Vino del País, you are referring that you're drinking wine that it's from that place. So when you go to a restaurant that it's not a fancy restaurant, it's what we call a casa de comidas, a meals house. It's traditional food, and you will see that in the menu, they always say Vino del País, and it's just like wine from that place. So I want to think that the dialect that we speak in the Canary Islands and the Chilean style of Spanish have a lot in common, because they are rooted like in an ancient sort of a Spanish language. So I think that it would suggest that it's the grape that is grown there, especially because it was the most extended, the most cultivated, right?
Yeah, for a long time, it was the only thing there was. Well, Negro Mole was mixed in, but very little of it. But in the end, grapes come here in, I'm trying to think, it's before phylloxera, but not that much. I mean, it's the 1800s.
Yeah.
When, you know, I'm not sure that's the Belle Epoque, but I mean, that's when the want to have French designers for their gardens around their homes and that sort of thing begins.
Yeah.
Fancy.
Before that, it was all Pais.
Shall we jump into the tasting?
Yeah.
So generally with tastings, I like to make everybody, first of all, I hope you've already been tasting and sampling as we go along here, since we've talked for a while. But generally, I like to get people to taste before I tell them what I think, just so that I don't influence their taste, essentially. So maybe if we just all take a second to stick our noses in our glass and focus our senses upon it, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I think it tastes like, and you know, hopefully some other people think it tastes the same, but no pressure. If you don't taste what I say, then go with what you taste. Okay, so I think we can flip to my tasting notes, Celia. I hope everybody's had a chance. So for me anyway, Listan Negro has a very bright red fruit with a sprinkling of the smoky spice from a lit match kind of thing going on the nose. And then in the mouth, it feels medium minus. But when you take a look at the alcohol, you see it's pretty safely medium plus. But for me, it's the acid that brings it into balance and doesn't make it feel heavy and cloying like a wine with a lot of alcohol and not enough acidity can. So it's bright and lively, and the spice, I get a peppery kind of spice on the fruit. And then to me, the finish is really like I get a real nice saltiness that sort of, you know, is salivating. And, you know, as Jorge was saying, not a ton of tannins in it. You're not feeling a lot of grip on the side of your mouth there. Whereas Pais, there seems to be a little more perfume to it. And I was reading that Pais or Listan Prieto in the Canary Islands was also called Malvasia Negra, or sorry, Moscatel Negra, or Negro, Moscatel Negro, which sort of makes sense to me. Just not that it smells like muscatel or anything, but that perfuminess, that sort of top layer of perfume on there. Anyways, under there, I get a bit of darker red to purple fruit with a black smoky edge and a hint of what I call Chilean greenness. And it's not actually, it's got nothing to do with the ripeness of the grapes. I found in many Chilean wines, I get something that hits up here in the bridge of my nose. It's almost spearminty to them. And I've always wondered if it's part of the terroir or, I'm guessing it's part of the terroir, but maybe Derek can tell me more about that. In the mouth, it feels a touch fuller than Listan, but still has medium in the medium minus range, dark, smoky, savory fruit, touch less acid, but still good in balancing. And there's definitely a little more tannic structure to it as we go along. So I've sort of highlighted some of the differences there. On the next slide, we get into what I think are the major similarities between the grapes, and that's the quality of the fruit on it. While it's not the same quality of fruit, they taste like ripe fruit to me. It doesn't taste like the fruit from a wine grown in Burgundy or Beaujolais or somewhere farther north. It tastes like a ripe sun-drenched fruit, but then the wines both have this sort of lightness of being that makes them very enjoyable and quaffable and easy drinking. And they both along with their fruit, they both have savory qualities. Either spicy or peppery, which I think adds an element of depth to both of the wines. And really, I think you should. My advice is to chill lightly and drink easy. And that's about it for the similarities, at least in my books. I don't know if anybody else has any others. I think we can move on to questions. Or does anybody have anything else to say about the tasting?
Go ahead, Jorge.
Steve Mahood is asking us if anyone is willing to recognize a lactic creaminess to the nose of the Pais. What would you say to that?
Wines can go yogurty. I don't get.
I am amazed by the pepperiness in the Pais.
Pais normally has other things mixed into it. This has very little in this where this comes from, but generally Pais would be given a within a farm would be given a base note from Cariñena, which comes much later, which comes after an earthquake in 1939. But we try and make this in a style where how kind of say the gentleman farmer of the neighborhood would drink. Some people in Chile, especially younger winemakers, are making it in a lighter style, much more kind of suave. In the end, it's to me it's more international, but to me it's not truly representative of what they would drink. Kind of the old men would say, this is minus the bass note. It's like you're playing, you don't have 4 instruments, you just have 3. And it's not bad, but they wouldn't get into that kind of sophistication, and they'd want a little more of the acidity. There's some Torrente Negro. I mean, we're talking plants. You could number them, sort of thing. But we try and make a Pais that is a little more structure to it. It's kind of just the beginnings of. But that to us represents what comes from where we are in the Mallee. If you go further south to Bio Bio, I think Roberto Enriquez's wines are in Toronto through someone. That would be kind of the example of the other end of the scale, which is much lighter and much more. Do you say glue up there? Glue. Yeah.
Glue.
Yeah, wonderful wines. I mean, very elegant. Yeah.
I think it's totally depending on the climate, no? So Maule is a little bit more warmer than Bio Bio or Itata. And
where we are, though, you always have to remember in Chile that you go north-south,
okay.
Tricky. Where we are out on the coast in Trujillo, it's not how far north-south you are, it's how close up on the granitic coastal range you are.
So I think it's more interesting.
It's much colder.
It's more interesting if you are more on the coast, more to granitic soils. I think it's more easy to understand the freshness of your wine in this way, no? Because of the of the sea, because of the coast hills and the granitic soils, I think. And I think
We
it's
still remember, for everyone at home, Chile has 2 mountain ranges.
Yeah.
The Andes are much younger and we're much, how do you say, faster to cool. The coastal range, just like you have the Rockies and the Monachies and whatever else, the coastal range is much slower to cool. And that's where granite is, metamorphic rock, where crystals are, where the soils of the great wines of the world are. And it absolutely makes a difference. It gives it a lift, gives it freshness, gives it longevity.
Yeah.
What I love about each of the wines in the Pais is that peppermint that I am having on the glass. I think it's because I love the chocolate with peppermint. That's something, it's one of my favorite combinations. So I am really liking this wine. And I think that it's a very special wine. And considering that it's your entry level, Derek, I think that it over delivers. It's pretty amazing. And when it comes to the Listán Negro, I will make a reference again to the terroir, because in the Canary Islands we have volcanic soils, and I can feel like all the smokiness and the saltiness too. And I don't get to drink my family wines too frequently because we don't have a lot here in Toronto, but every time I taste it, it's like, oh, how cute it is to taste home, right? Then think of the Mount Taylor that we have there, that it's almost like 4,000-meter high, and we have super young volcanic soils that might be 6,000 years old, where these vines are planted. So yeah, very, very, very special.
Someone's asked about neutral oak. Our wine is in barrels, but they're the oldest barrels in the cellar. So there's nothing, there's no, I say there's no taste to the wood. The beauty is that those barrels breathe. The idea is to not influence. We get barrels in their 3rd year. We use them in Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon for a couple of years. These would all be 6, 7, 8, if not more.
Yeah, we do the same. Very neutral barrel, and this Listán Negro is only in barrel for 3 months, because if we leave it more, we would sort of like overcook it. We think. So we have more questions here. I'm gonna read them to you guys. Nancy says, Derek is explaining how his País might be different from what older drinkers in Chile might recognize. I wonder how the Viñátigo Listán Negro is different from what Juan Jesus, our father, might remember. It seems more elegant and rustic. Also, what in the winemaking techniques accounts for this difference? If we start to make a comparison on how the wines taste today and how they were tasting 50 years ago, I would say that cleaning is one of the most important things, because before the wineries would be at someone's houses, and you would not do it in an industrial way. Industrial in the sort of like, you wouldn't have like a winery that you clean and that you are like selling it, so you take care of all the traceability, etc. It would be, you wouldn't even bottle the wine. So I think that would make like a big difference, bottling the wine and storing it in a bottle rather than leaving it in the tank and just, like taking it off with that little thing that you take it off. Yeah, and also the quality of the vessels that you were using. Maybe my grandfather was using vessels for decades, and in this case, we try to not overuse them, right? People is loving the peppermint in the País.
So
the Chilean greenness.
I think it's really important to say, normally right now in the wine market is normally to find low alcohol wines this way, because it's really trendy to find wines with 11.5% alcohol, 12% alcohol. Okay, all it's perfect, and I love this type of wines. But you think we are in Tenerife Island, in the North Face, with the totally influence of the trade winds. So here, for us, it's more important to have balance between acidity and alcohol, no? So if we decide to pick the grapes with 11.5% of alcohol, we have a really high acidity, and it's totally undrinkable wines. So it depending the zone, the area you are. Yes, for example, I have friends in the South Face making Listan Blanco, and normally for us, Listan Blanco is good between 12 and 12.5 and 6, 7 acidity. But my friend have 14.5% alcohol and 6, 7 acidity. So it depending the high altitude, the low altitude, depending the influence of the trade winds, and all we want it's always the balance, no? So if we have a
Yeah.
good natural acidity and a good alcohol volume, I think we will have a good great wine.
Someone is mentioning carbonic maceration, Derek. How is that with Chile in Pais? Never.
No, carbonic maceration is a wonderful way to make glue wines. It gives a certain fruit, but it homogenizes it. It erases
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
If you ask my wife about this, she would say, keep the chewing gum or the candy floss. She'd say, keep the candy floss well away from my red wine. Thank you very much. Now, if you gave her a Morgon or certain wines from France where that's always been done that way, she would enjoy that wine. And she'd say that's their thing. You know, I get it. But for the rest of the world to try and imitate that is really silly. We don't use much in Pais, but with the parcel series, with the Carignans, we introduce stems. We stomp as well, but we introduce stems in because you want that you want the tension from the stem, you want the tannin that comes from the fruit from the vineyard instead of the barrel, because it's more the place. But carbonic is I don't like those wines.
Became very popular in.
Yeah, Pais in the beginning there were some people doing that, and generally I think they've backed off. And that's become like a commercial thing. Carbonic wines now are kind of like those wines with lots of residual sugar in them.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it was a fad. It was when it went too far, and now the pendulum swings back, and we're better. You can get fruit if you have fruit from a good place. Wine is made in the vineyard. I'm not the first one to say that. I'm just repeating it. But if you grow wine, you can get the fruit you want. You don't need. Carbonic to me is for someone that you realize the fruit coming in from the vineyard isn't as good as you'd like, and you somehow are going to be some super chef that's going to make, for the first time ever in the history of man, you're going to make a good wine from bad fruit. No,
yeah.
Sorry. No, that's just shortcuts.
It's very funny because carbonic maceration became very popular in the Canary Islands in the 90s, and everybody was putting on the label maceración carbónica. And we have had this conversation many times in my family, and it's like you're making homogeneous wines. It's like, right? It was following the trend of Beaujolais Nouveau that they were thinking that it was, the best thing you could ever drink, and not really understanding your terroir and your environment and also your history. Because why would you make a carbonic maceration with a vine that has 200 years old? Like, you could do something better with that.
It can be. But people do like it. I mean, we've had we received something for elicitation for Norway or Sweden, I can't remember, but they literally in the, how do you say, where they lay out the, what do you call it, the specifics, the parameters that you make it, they wanted carbonic. And the group of producers sent a mail saying, like, sorry, but you guys are not getting this. Why would you include that? And in the end, there's a serious, interesting exchange of emails there was had. Yeah.
I don't know if someone in the chat would have any more questions about this.
I should say something about Chilean greenness.
Go ahead.
Greenness to me is something that cheap Cabernet, too close to eucalyptus, but not. I don't think anything we have here tonight is not menthol. I don't think that's Chilean greenness. I think it's not right to mix the idea of a Chilean greenness with anything that's not so smaller producers, but any kind of smaller, more focused wines. Chilean greenness is when big companies trying to get too big too fast are trying to supply an English supermarket or a Canadian LCBO or whatever. And I don't think that's Chilean. I think you could find that same from things. I mean, that's me, but I always, Chilean winemakers travel in the world and hear the bit about Chilean greenness, and we have to smile and say, you know what? We don't drink Chilean Merlot that you buy in the supermarket. Wouldn't be our thing. And to be quite honest, that wine wouldn't exist in Chile. That wine is a wine that, you know, have a series of MWs designed to be made for supermarkets, but it was never a Chilean wine.
Yeah, I think that what I am tasting in your Pais goes beyond any sort of Chilean greenness. It's way too special from my perspective.
There's herbs
it's a
there.
pepper.
This doesn't have anise, but there's a couple
Mhm.
plants that would be relatives of anise or fennel, which aren't precisely those things.
Yeah.
That idea of a what do we say
Yeah, that fennel seed touch.
Yeah, but we need as Chileans
Fresh.
to invent some new ones. I mean, in the end, we heard someone last week talking about garrigue. I mean, garrigue is a French word used in English, and the Chileans in Spanish can't come up with a better way of talking about the herbs in a wine. And
Everything
they say,
sounds cooler in English.
but they say
Everything.
don't say enojo, because that's that plant that that's like burrs that stick to your pants and don't smell very good. But okay, I get you. It's a bummer to have to smell that in the car as you go home with too much of it stuck to your pants. But you know what? A touch of that gives that a little bit of unique spiciness that's somewhere between fennel and anise. It's wonderful. I'm not sure when that vocabulary is going to start, but I hope someone in Chile starts soon.
Derek, I know that. Sorry, Jorge, go ahead.
No, I'm totally agree with Derek because of the Chilean greenness between the big Cabernet or big Carmener of the big companies and Pais from the south, no? So I think this taste in Pais is very singular from Pais, but it's not a Chilean green taste.
Yeah. You have some experience making Blanc de Noir, Derek. Was it from Pais or Cariñena?
Phoenix comes to through Nicholas Pierce, comes to Ontario. In 2017, we had our bushfires. Hopefully we won't have those anytime soon, like California and like Australia. And we work with small farmers, and in the end you develop relationships over years and years, and you realize this year a wine made like we're tasting now in a smoky year, you know, would probably smell like an ashtray. So what do you do? So a whole series of circumstances is not worth going to here, but it was like a sign from God that maybe we should try making white this year. And we made this white with very low, how do you say expectations. And then a few months later, we tasted it for the first time, the three of us finally got up our nerve to get like, let's taste what happened. And there was like little white flowers like jasmine, and it had boca because we put some cariñena in it, which filled out, so it had acidity, and it was a hit. And everyone always said they smelled smoke in it. The lab tests, Rex, the sniffer at the airport, could not pick up that quantity of what's it called? Okay, guayacol is the substance you smell. It's the smokiness, but we've kept making it. We actually made a lot more of it this year, and we called it the Phoenix because an English friend had a dry sense of humor and said, you should call that the Phoenix ferment. I was like, thank you for that. We'll use that. Born of the ashes. See,
so it was mainly Pais, and then some Cariñena.
Yes. Yeah, you know what? It actually has a little more Cariñena in it, but we can't say anything because this is an interesting historical point.
We will keep your secret.
País runs on the old appellation system. Maipo, Colchagua, Cachapoal, Maule, Itata are new things that Wines of Chile invented 30 something years ago. That was a logical way to show that, hey, we have DO, no, but DOs as well. But in truth, the old system of País, Cinso and Moscatel and the old things from colonial times, hundreds of years old, is Secano Interior and whatever the town is closest. So Secano Interior would be dry farmed interior, and then Cauquenes or Coelemo or Empedrao or whatever the town was. And if you think about Chile, if you think of Apal, if you know other Chilean wines, Apalta, part called dry farmed Secano Interior, where Carmener comes from, in Pelmo, even further north. I mean, besides Puente Alto and the Maipo calves, all of Chile is the best wines of Chile are the rain shadow of this coastal range, Secano Interior. And for some reason, the big boys don't want País to join their system. So if you combine Cariñena with País, you're in two different laws, and whatever government will say, no, you can't have more than 15% of that, because then you're using two systems that are designed not to go together. So we say it's 14. You're right. The secret's with us.
The secret is with us. Well, that was cool.
We make two. Sorry, I shouldn't talk so much. Jorge, you have to speak more. We make two whites, and one is the País is two reds made
The
into
other
white.
one is the semillon.
Semillon, which is made as if it were a red. And some people would call it orange, but it's not orange because it's not oxidized. But in the end, it's made with its good part of it. It's made with its skins as if it were red.
Yeah, I wanted to bring this up because someone asked what's the potential for these grapes for sparkling wines or even Blanc de Noir, and I have tasted your Fine experiments before, so I wanted you to talk a little bit about it. As for the Canary Islands, I have never tried a sparkling of Listán Negro. I have tried sparkling from Listán Blanco and also Pet Nat made from Negra Mole, but not Listán Negro. What do you think the potential could be, Jorge, for Listán Negro sparkling wines?
Normally, if you want to make sparkling wines from red grapes in Canary Islands, I think the best way is to make rosé sparkling wines.
Mm-hmm.
For me, yes, it depends. I don't remember never to try some sparklings, red sparklings. I remember to try some rosé from different wineries. Are good, depend the company, but normally rosé.
It's true that sparkling wine has never been something that people would make in the Canary Islands.
Yeah.
We don't. It's more of a novelty lately. In the last 5 years. There are some great examples, like Bodegas Tajinaste has a sparkling that it's extremely delicious, and I think that it's around here. So if you ever have the chance to try it, it's very, very good.
There's a lot of not a lot, but there are people making sparkling from Cinsault and from País. I am very much for it because kind of almost for the reasons of the cause. I think that when you pick País earlier with a higher yield, a company like Miguel Torres, I will give them their credit where credit's due. They basically invented a sparkling called Estelado, and it made an impact that people were selling País, and it was worth working. They helped them with the organic certification. In the end, I take my hat off. There's good sparkling from Chile today, but 5 or 6 years ago or 10 years ago, I remember thinking that was the best sparkling we had in Chile. And it's wonderful the effect that it can have. I'm not sure Miguel Torres is probably in Ontario. I'm not sure who else are the smaller producers that make sparkling from País, but I think it has its place. I don't think it's specialized for that. I like to see it as a red. The other is kind of a means to an end. Let's invent something to keep this. How do you say, keep people pulling it out? But what we've done this year, I'm not sure when it will ever get to Canada. With our Swedish and our English importers here, we're making one called Revival. Basically what we did was we created a couple of bubbles of people to keep safe during this bug, and we put them to work reviving vines in the backyard so that they didn't have to get into these vans with people from other towns to go and work on the fundos far away. And it's been really quite interesting because in the end, there were a couple of vineyards that were just full of bushes and shrubberies. In the end, it wasn't a vineyard, and the fire went through there. It was like dispatched. And in the end, with a little bit of tender loving care, the roots beneath the surface are there, and they come up, and we prepared all the soils. We put pitons to give the plants support. And some of the best pictures for this, the old wood is dead, but the roots are alive. It's like a glacier. It's like the 5% above and the 95% below. In the end, the photographer or the label maker wants the shot of the gnarly old wood, but the value of an old vine is the roots beneath the surface. So you take this dead old wood and you clip it all back and you use it as the support for the new sprout of the roots to
Yeah.
give it support. And it's quite something when you see, it's like, how does that work? That's dead. And then, yeah, but it's free, it's there, it's solid. And then that'll be cut off later when the plant is formed. But there's a piece of about 3/4 of an acre in Truquilemo where we were picking today. It's probably 60% of the plants are back. And if you'd looked at that, I mean, you can look at the next section, the next acre over is just like it was last year. And you look at that and look at this and kind of scratch your head and think, no way. But in the end, the life force beneath is there. We did some grafting of Cariñena after the earthquake because people have an end of a Pais vineyard. And we want to put a little more where we like the sites. We'll do a little more and we'll give it a few years and we'll have more Cariñena. And the plants that failed, that you put a POA where it doesn't get hold, the roots from the Pais just come right back up again. The plant doesn't die. In the beginning, I thought, my God, we're gonna take a chainsaw to these things. And he said, this is like living patrimony. This is like, it's gotta be 150 years old and you want me to take a chainsaw and cut it off. But in the end, you see that very few of them, I mean, 1 in 100 doesn't come back. The rest of them, it's like alien. It all comes up.
Trying to survive.
See, the force
like
of
all
Pais,
of us.
no, but the living force of Pais, no,
Yeah.
those raisins that came over were very special raisins. Hey,
We have a survival
That's
system
true.
in El Hierro Island. The wine growers make la margullida. So they bury the vines. When they think the vines are dead, they bury all the vines in the soil to create roots again. So when you walk around the vineyards, you say, okay, these vineyards are new ones, no? But when you dig in the soil, you can see vines with 100 and 150 years because all the vines are buried in the soil, and then you have a new one because you create roots in the vines. So it's really interesting.
there's a couple questions there.
Yeah, so Megan is asking if you irrigate or is there any water availability issues where you are?
No, it's dry farming. Basically, you have rain in winter and certain things grow as like cover crops, clovers and things that generally have a lot of nitrogen that are good for the other. And you turn that over to introduce that into the soil. And that is the nourishment you have. The old plants, the roots go very deep. And that's how they survive. They have for hundreds of years. There's certain places where you could say that, I don't know, climate change or whatever has affected things, but generally these are very old systems and there's a lot less water and the plants survive. And they're not drying up anytime soon.
We have a question for Jorge. Sorry, you were asking Josh?
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say there's been some interesting research done on forests that might be related to this and the survivability of these old rootstocks. And they've noticed in forests that in fact, a lot of this is done in British Columbia. But anyways, old growth forests, you'll have the roots of all the trees being connected by fungal mycelia, which they call the wood wide web, and it's actually responsible for transporting nutrients from one plant to another. Now, generally, they'll favor their genetic offspring, but they'll also even pass it to other plants. They're not genetically pass, sugars and nutrients coming from one tree, flow through the roots, then through these fungal mycelia into the roots of another plant. So if you've got a tree that's been cut down, the root system will actually be kept alive from the sugars from another tree that hasn't been cut down yet. And that's what allows it to sprout up. So, I mean, I've just thought that something similar might be happening in very old vineyards, where it looks like they're separate organisms, but really when you get down and you look at, they're actually a composite organism between the plant and the fungus that you don't see because it's all underground. And I wonder if such things don't happen in very old vineyards where you have plant material that is very well adapted to its location.
Soil health and that kind of the how do you say the fungi, the how do you say the on a microbacterial level is very important, and it's things that for years people have thought this is you know, in viticulturalists it's always like let's kill everything but the grapes, you know, and in the end it's just insane some of the thinking that's gone in the end. I suppose you've made some wonderful wine doing that, but in truth it's absolutely insane. I highly recommend. I mean that kiss the ground, we have to get there. I think the idea of tilling is going to be like sulfur, the idea of no sulfur, and then we're going to have pendulum swings of how we're really working, how deep we're working, how there's seasonal crops that one supports the other. But I think you'll know how I feel about this by our hats for this season. Yes, absolutely. In the end,
send a few over.
See, in the end, it's absolutely key to how do you say to plants. There's a lot of work going on in a lot of places. I'm not sure specifically what you're saying. They're really seeing that, but in the end, the idea that there's different plants at different times of the year, and that is how do you say creates an effect. Absolutely, where soils worked well, plants are completely different. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
We have a question for Jorge. No, I think it's super interesting. Jorge, as the 5th generation winemaker, are you more interested in the ensamblajes than the single variety wines? What's your point of view regarding that?
Well, for me, it's really interesting to keep the single grape wines because are the heritage of 30 years of work, no? But I think, or we think, we have the complexity of the terroir when we make blends, no? So it's really nice to taste single grape wines, to understand the grapes, to understand the grapes that come from and all of this. But I think the future is to keep single grape wines in minimal productions and to make wines from the soil, no? So, for example, right now we make Listan Blanco, normally from the highlands of the northwest face of Tenerife. But then I think it's really interesting to start to work in make wines from different areas. Listan Blanco from here, Listan Blanco from here, Listan Blanco from here. No, it's nice for us, but it's really difficult for the market because in this way we can have 50 different wines perfectly.
Especially because the north of Tenerife, when we think about vineyards, we don't have like huge pieces of land that are vineyards. We are talking about microplots. And well, Josh traveled to the Canary Islands last year with me and he saw that. And it's like maybe from one plot, you get one barrel, that it's 300 bottles. So as Jorge said, it's very interesting for the wine geek, but maybe it's not interesting for your pocket.
But I think the future is to make wines from the terroir, wines from the soil, and normally in all vineyards, in all vine vineyards, you have a mix of different grapes. So normally it's to find the blends in the soil, to find the blends, and to find the terroir. No, I think it's the future right now.
This is something like what you are doing in Trujillo, right, Derek? That you have some field blends with Mediterranean varieties.
See, no,
like you never thought of like making those grapes separately, but always together, like a field blend.
We spent a lot of years doing the bits, trying to separate them, even though they're going back into the same wine, so that we could compare Monastrell from here, there, and there, Garnacha from here, there, and there. Cariñena Nieblar, there's like 12 sites where it comes from. But now it's more co-fermented because that's what we're going for. I agree with Jorge that it's soil and it's, how do you say, it's terroir, but I think there's an element of farming.
Yeah.
That I think that's the word we have to use more. Just kind of farming more because that's what it is. You know, I don't know what we have to do in the world, but you know, everyone wants their kids to be doctors or lawyers, and you need a lawyer once every couple of years, a doctor twice a year. You need a farmer 3 times a day, for God's sake. I mean, maybe we should put a little more emphasis on that sort of thing. But I really do think the farming is a means of, you know, we say regenerative farming now because we realize the damage we've done. But I think there's a thing there where we have to maintain these things. And to me, the way to think about that is not that we're, you know, saving the earth. That's where the flavor comes from. In the end, this is, you know, who's the crazy chef, Dan Barber in the US? In the end, to him, it was all about flavor. It wasn't about saving fish or whatever it was he talks about in his TED Talks. And I completely agree with him. In the end, it's when you find the flavor, you start to realize that, okay, the geeks will go first, and then we'll start to realize that this is good for what we eat and the planet or the place or whatever. I think that's where we have to go. I suppose I like to talk about the farming because in the end, there's so many people know more about rocks and subsoils than I do. I'm not going to go out and do a PhD in geology. I'm too old. But in the end, there is something that you can learn and apply. You know, in the end, the beauty of being a Canadian here is that you're forced to be like you are innately the cross-pollinator because you don't know how it's supposed to be done. In Chile, we say así no se hace o así no se dice. It's like that's not how you do that. It's like if it's working so well, why are we in this? You know, so clearly someone's got to try, and in the end, you become this cross-pollinator. But what if we take that idea and this idea? And that's the beauty of something like this that we're comparing wines. I mean, I think I'm the only one in this valley that hasn't been to the Canary Islands to taste Pais. I mean, everyone's traveling a lot more and comparing things. And what one does over here, you start to realize, well, that could work here. That's a truer means of doing what we do here. It'll be different than there, but that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, something that it's very interesting when we are talking about making like blends or single grape wines is that you have to understand the heritage of the place where you come from. So when my father started, he would see that the vineyard that he was taking care of that belonged to his family was mainly planted with Listán Blanco and Listán Negro, but then there were a few vines of Marmajuelo, Negramol, Wal, and there isn't a scientific reason for that because everything was based on the experience of the wine growers. And I think that that's also important. Farming is important, of course, the environment of that plot when it comes to soil and weather, it's also important, but trying to understand why our ancestors decided to make that mix. Maybe some grapes were adding what other grape was missing. I know that my father always says that Negramol is usually planted with Listán Negro and co-vinified because it would add some sort of like
delicate
elegance to the final blend, right? So it's true that there is more and more people planting vines in the Canary Islands, but maybe they are focusing on planting only one grape and they are not trying to understand what could be done if you make a blend, right? And it comes to the ecosystem of the vineyard, not only the grapes that you're going to have, but also what cover are you going to plant or what fruit trees are going to be around, and think of that mix of grapes that you desired your wine to be, and that would pair with the environment.
In this mix of all vines, normally in our area, you can find Listán Blanco for keep the acidity, Listán Negro for have productivity, Negramol for have a good palate, delicate palate, Tintilla for put color. In a wine that you don't have color, because in the past people want to have color in the wines, and Moscatel for have a little bit of aromatic flavors, no? So all of this mix you can find in the same old vineyards, like 200 years old, 200 and a half. So the people make the wine in the
vineyard.
No, absolutely. I think that perhaps for me, my best way of thinking of that is when the Incas had potatoes, and of course the Europeans came and they said, well, let's just take the white ones because they're more pure. Hence the potato famine. In the end, there's no way to scientifically prove that. But in the end, have varieties mixed was because there was effect, like the roots that Josh is talking about. There's an effect between those things. And you know, that's even before you start talking about of having different potatoes on your plate.
Yeah.
You know, but these absolutely. I know some elderly people, some wonderful names in our neighborhood. We have Nivaldo and Bolivar and Clorindo. Clorindo, the other day I said, yeah, we're doing Pais, and he said, you want me to put the so and so in? And I was like, what do you mean? And he basically took me to introduce me to the plants, and it was like one by one. And there was a Torrentel Negro, and then there was a couple of Carignans, and then he knew where they all were. And then we started talking about Negro Mole. No, they're over the other side here. I mean, they didn't have names, but he might as well have had names. You know, this is a man he's like 80. I don't know. He's elderly. So anyway, it was rather funny. And I think if you'd asked him that question, it would have been very interesting, his answer. He was like, that's the way you make the wine here. He probably wouldn't have had a scientific reason of what gives what. But the vineyard, part of this vineyard is the fact that it has those things.
And I mean, to me, these things, like this sort of knowledge that's been passed down through generations, to me is like the indigenous knowledge of an area. I was talking about that root thing with a producer from Chianti, and he's like, oh, that's why when they were planting the old vineyards, they always left one old oak tree in the vineyard. Then, you know, and he seemed to see that as making sense, because that old oak tree would then support the new vines, kind of thing. And it just these sort of traditions that get passed down, and people don't necessarily know why they get passed down, but they've been or they don't know why they work, but they know they work, and so they continue doing them. And it's sort of this, you know, to me, it's the knowledge that is the indigenous knowledge, the knowledge that you get that's built up over generations of working closely with the land. You sort of hear these stories from different places, and they're all different stories, but they all come down to this, like, oh, I'm doing what my father told me that his grandfather taught him, kind of thing. And they might not have a scientific reason for why they're doing it, but if you do the science, you find out they have a very good reason for it.
I think another, sorry, Derek.
We say field craft. It's kind of what's passed down. It's like this wisdom that's come down. I always like the word trade craft. So we start saying field craft. In the end, it's what people, you know, how do you even calculate that? I mean, there's so many things, and you have to know how to listen. We have a partner, my wife and I have a partner who's a PhD in viticulture from Spain, Dr. Alvaro Peña. And it's fascinating to see him with some of these farmers, because in the end, he has this lens of science. And then you have the, how do you say, like this gut or this almanac-y kind of sense that they have. And it's like how it comes back and forth is sometimes absolutely fascinating. And then you have what really happened this year or the year before. You have what's in a glass. And then you start coming up with conclusions of, you know, not who's right, but what we learn from this as we go on.
I think that's something that if we are still comparing the wines, these wines have in common, because at Viñátigo we also have been working with wine growers for 30 years, and now they are like 80 years old, and they continue to come to the winery and bring their grapes to see how is the acidity level and everything. And I find it so nice when you direct post on Instagram about the wine growers that you work with, that they are all like super old and you always feature them. And I think that it's a good way of maintaining the heritage of a place and the identity and the culture.
I love working with them. I just think it's interesting. You know, if you were writing a book, there's more than a chapter that you could just dedicate the time knowing there's a chapter coming out of it. We had a case this year where we pick a Semillon that is mixed with Sauvignon Blanc. And I said, like, tomorrow we all have our partners here, but remember tomorrow, one of each little group of 3, 2 pick and 1 carries. I said, it has to be solid on what's what, so we know. And Don Jorge says, I know that vineyard. I can help. I helped plant it. And sure enough, the next day we were there, and it was planted 65 years ago. And he was young, and I was just like, okay, I guess the math works on that. That's. But it was really quite. And he was proud as punch. So a friend came who brought someone from the Guardian or something, and in the end, they had the pictures with them and everything. He was the center of attention for a while. It was kind of cool. But one of the biggest challenges is what happens next. We have when younger people want to stay on the farm or are proud to come and work with their fathers and that. And a woman, in the case of one of the farms, she's sub 30, and I don't know how she's going to deal with some of these people, but I'm absolutely fascinated that she wants to work on that farm and she wants to be the person. I'm very open-minded, and I think I can get that through. Otherwise, I don't think it would be looked upon. It's going to be a challenge, but it's that next generation. We get them to continue on, because that's what we need. That's where we have to go.
Well, and do you think that maybe the sort of renaissance of the Pais grape and it having more like winemakers using it and exporting it and giving the grape more value is not going to help that in some way, or at least maybe help the lives of the people who are farming it now?
Absolutely, but it's very atomized. It's very fragmented. In the end, there's larger companies buying the fruit and taking it far away to make it. There are people who are from there who are kind of taking advantage of a bit of the buzz, and they're really not making it well enough. And in the end, you kind of think, let's hope that doesn't get exported. And then amongst the whole natural wine community, obviously there's people who work wonderfully well, and there's other people who, they're trying to put a defect in it so it tastes like that other wine they tried. And then you just kind of think, guys, what will come out of the wash in a decade's time? Because in the end, it has to happen. Everyone has their to add. I like to think that people contribute. No, I think everyone who's making a contribution to it, we will find the way. But absolutely, Pais has been very good for the locals and good for the market too. Good for Chile. I remember I was in the U.S. a few years ago, and I was with whoever was taking me around as the distributor of more than one state. And I said, can I go into the shop first before they know who I am? Because I speak English, so I'll just say, and I go into these wine shops and I'd say, I'm looking for wine from Chile, but I never buy Chilean wine. But a buddy's coming in, his suegra's here, his mother-in-law's here, who's in from Chile. So I got to take something Chile. What do I take? And then I have them sell me what they think is a good Chilean wine. And much to my surprise, they sold me Pais, but with fanfare, almost a vengeance. In the end, I said, no, but there's this, here's this Montes, whatever, it's on for half price. I'm used to spending more in a bottle. And they'd look you in the eyes and say, if you want to spend $40 on Chilean wine, buy 2 bottles of Pais. And I was like, wow, if you'd said this to a commercial, a wine, how do you say, a wine salesman from Chile 5 or 10 years ago, they would have laughed at you. Oh, yeah. And now you start to see, people saying, well, but why'd you guys lead with Cabernet? Why didn't you start with this? You think, who knows?
I could speak with you guys for hours and hours and hours. You're an open book, all of you.
Someone said I'm super old here. That's not nice. I know who you are. I actually got my second vaccination today. That's how old I am. That's why I'm spitting the wine tonight.
Well, I don't know if anyone of the attendees have any more questions, but I think that we have covered many topics tonight. I can say that it's been super interesting from my perspective, and hopefully we can chat at a table sometime soon.
Someday.
At archive.
Yeah, we will take this virtual session to a physical one when it's possible. Yeah. Well, thank you guys.
I'd like to thank you. I'm sure Nicholas is there somewhere. Nicholas, thank you for the support and getting behind this in us in Ontario. I think this is great. I think what you're doing is good for the Ontario drinker.
We are all very thankful for him.
As well as all of us here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and people who decided to tune in to us. I hope it was interesting for you.
Yeah, I hope you had a good night, and thank you very much, Josh, for hosting.
Cheers.
Cheers to you guys.
Cheers. It's 1 a.m. in Spain, so I think it's not a good idea to.
You're going to bed, right, Jorge?
Mm.
Great.
At least
Well,
you don't
thank
have to get up at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock for harvest tomorrow.
Well, he's going to the vineyards, I'm sure.
Yeah, tomorrow, yes.
Awesome. This will be recorded if you ever need to have to
I
see it
do have
again.
one more question for Jorge.
Tell me.
Okay,
Have you ever thought of making a field blend from any of those small old vineyards where they've planted a bunch of different grapes?
Yeah. So it's really interesting to think about to make this. Normally, all people, so
yeah.
people in the village make the wine like this. It's like a pipeño, no? But they make vino, no?
Yeah.
So they mix all because they don't have idea, but they have idea, no? So so
I know
I
what you
think
mean.
it's a really good way to make something with these old vines. I want, but it's necessary to know about the cycle of the different grapes, no? To pick in the perfect moment.
For each one, and then maybe layer them, or
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's one of the ways in the future of the Canary Island for me to explain this, to understand the soil, to understand the climate, to understand the terroir, to understand to farm grapes. It's to mix all again, to make field blends, and to come back in the past with our head, no? So I think it's really interesting.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
sorry to extend it even longer. That
Josh,
question would bug me
yeah.
if I didn't ask it.
Josh,
but I'm sure the field blend will be great, judging from your other wines so far.
Josh, what you just said about when it's ready, you put it on top, sort of thing. This is a single ferment series. The two lesser wines, the Cinsault and this, and that is effectively how we do them. The first year we did them, complete miscalculation on my part. My wife laughed and said, great, Derek, you got 3 sites, and where are you going to put it? I just came from the winery, and you got 1 tank. So I didn't say anything to my 2 partners, and I stacked the fruit when it was ready, and then I prayed that it came dry, and it did. It was the Cinsault, was the first one we ever did, and that's why it's one single fermentation. And in the end, they become, we say vino de pueblo, like a village wine from Burgundy, whatever, because the idea is that so many of the families that work with us have a little bit of Pais, and you want to spread the love. So you're paying a proper price to more people, but in the end, you can never pick enough in a day to actually fill a tank. So it drives some people absolutely crazy. They say, oh, it'll never work and whatever. And you're kind of like, it'll work just fine. In the end, what happens is, sorry, we're going on too long.
No.
We could stay here forever.
As long as I have wine in my glass, I can talk about wine.
Do you know what happens? You're a geek. You'll get this. When you do that, what you end up happening is the first bits that go in, the malolactic begins right away because of the heat from the fermentation of the second and the third bits you put in. So in the end, you end up with a wine that is ready relatively more quickly, because it has a little more funk to it that it should have so young. But if it's from, proper farms, it has decent acidity, it's protected, but it's more approachable. So in the end, in a backwards way, you've made a wine, I'm not sure this is an entry-level wine, but in the end, you've made your lower rung wines more approachable, younger. So we say these are 1 winter wines. So after the first winter, you would begin to drink them in September through, whereas Carignan, malolactic doesn't finish till about January. It's like 11 months later, and hey, malolactic finishes. We could put a little bit of sulfur in this and put it it's already in a barrel. But in the end, those are 2 winter wines. But that stacking is a wonderful way to make wine. Yeah, I bet. I think it's time
Drinking them.
to finish.
Thank you.
Cheers to all.
Everybody who attended. Thank you to the winemakers.
No, thank you to yours, to Celia, to Nicolas. I think to all the people who come here with us. And good night.
Cheers from Chile, everyone. Enjoy.
Cheers, everybody.
Enjoy spring.
Bye.
Bye-bye.